Hi everyone, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome. Today we're going to be doing an overview of Santa Maura Capri, the new two-player war game from Square Games and designed by Andrew Roarke. This is now game 3 in the Limits of Glory system, which explores Napoleonic campaigns with some unique, fresh mechanics. Game 3 is actually 2 games in one box. The first game covers the 1810 British invasion of the island of Santa Maura, and the second game covers the French and Italian invasion of Capri in 1808. Let's set the historical context for both games. Geographically, Capri is a small island in the Mediterranean, about 20 miles south of the city of Naples. In 1806, the French invaded and occupied the Italian island, but 4 months later, the British captured the island during the French invasion of Naples. The British then turned the island into a fortified base from which they could attack France and its allies. In 1808, the French city-state of Naples attempted to recapture the island, and that 2-week campaign is the subject of the Capri game in this box. Historically, the French retook the island in part because of adverse weather which impacted the effectiveness of British reinforcements. The island of Santa Maura, which is currently called Lefkada, lies immediately off the west coast of Greece in the Ionian Sea, about 170 miles northwest of Athens. The island had been French-held since 1807, but by 1810, the British, along with some Greek volunteers, were set to attempt to retake the island from its French and Albanian defenders. In a fascinating 4-week campaign, after some hard fighting, the British retook the island, in part because the French distrusted their Albanian allies to such a degree that the entire 800-man force ended up defecting over to the British side. Let's jump in now and take a look at these 2 games. Let's do a quick overview of these games. Both of these games are 2-player games, and it should be noted as well that the 2 games in this box are smaller in scale and length than the previous games in the series, which makes this box potentially a great introduction to this growing series. Each game can be played in 45 to 90 minutes. Now, historically, the Capri game covers roughly 2 weeks of historical time, while the Santa Maura game covers 4 weeks. Turn length in the games is abstract, and in both games, a strength point or element on a military unit represents roughly 100 men. Let's do a high-level review of the mechanics now in Santa Maura and Capri. Probably the biggest thing to mention is that these games are part of the Limits of Glory system, so if you've played either of the other 2 games in the series, the learning curve for this edition will be smooth going. One of the best things about series games is the shortened learning curve, and if you've watched my recent overview of Maida 1806, much of what's here will be familiar. Similar to the other games in the Limits of Glory series, the 2 maps in this box are area control maps. As with the other game, each area has what's called a space value, rated from 1 to 3, which signifies how easy or hard it is for forces to take actions, like movement or so, in those areas. Both games have both land and naval units. Leaders are a huge part of gameplay, and connected to that is glory, the core mechanic of this Limits of Glory system. Glory represents a combination of a leader's skill and historical luck, and is expended by leaders throughout the game to influence a wide range of actions. Managing leader glory is a central part of playing the games in this series well. Commander seniority, exhaustion, and casualties are also modeled in the game. Momentum is a mechanic in the game that correlates with unit activations and is expended to allow for players to act in a turn. Combat uses a combination of dice rolling, force strength, and force quality to determine the combat results. Unlike the previous games in the series, which have a preliminary phase and then a conquest phase, Santa Maura and Capri each have only a single phase, the conquest phase, so the action starts right up in these 2 games. Sieges were key elements in both campaigns, and they're modeled in these games. The very cool event clock from the series is present in both games as well. This event clock uses a dice-based system to sequence events in roughly a historical order, but one that can play out differently in each game. Unique to Capri is a weather mechanic, which played a huge factor in the historical battle, and then unique to Santa Maura are a morale check for victory conditions and Albanian desertion. In Santa Maura, victory is solely determined by control of the fortress on Santa Maura. In Capri, victory is determined by a blend of conditions and victory points, and we'll take a look at these more closely when we look at the maps. Let's take a look at the rulebooks for the games. Most excellently, Santa Maura and Capri each have their own complete rulebooks, which are 32 pages long each. Now, because these are series games, however, there's a significant overlap in rules between the two games. Once you've learned one game, learning the other game will only take you a few minutes. As with the other rulebooks in the series, the text is very large and readable, and there's artwork scattered about that lessens the amount of actual content. Now, I've mentioned this in previous Formsquare Games overviews, but the creativity and freshness of the mechanics in this system has great appeal. There are just some clever ideas that have been built into these games, and it's fun to see how this system is now being easily modified to fit a range of Napoleonic campaigns. Complexity-wise, these games are similar to other games in the series, and as such, I'll give this set an identical 3.5 out of 10 on the complexity scale, with some of the challenge coming from wrapping your head around the novelty in some of these mechanics. Solitaire-wise, I'll go with a 6 out of 10. There aren't any notes or advice or rules for playing solitaire, but the information in both games is all face-up and on the table, so a solo player attempting to play these games should have little trouble bouncing back and forth between sides, trying to play each side to the best of his or her ability. Now, both games contain the one core scenario, and there aren't any optional rules. The event clock, however, will spawn a unique range of slightly alternate histories, meaning that each time you play one of these games, the game flow and feel could be very, very different. Let's explore the counters a bit. There are 3 sheets in all, and they are printed on a single side. For military units, we've got leaders, which are the circular counters here. Then we've got land units, which mostly represent infantry, but there are some artillery mixed in. And then naval units are generally circular units as well, like these longboats here. Now, these forces have strength values on them. The land forces and naval units have strength forces on them and function in a currency-like manner. So if you lose 2 strength points from a 5-strength infantry unit, you'd replace it with an equivalent of 3 strength points. And then for leaders, there are 2 identical counters for each leader, one that represents the leader on the game map, and the other counter goes on the numerical track on the map to represent the leader's glory total, which is then expended and depleted largely for dice rerolls as the campaign wears on. Now, counters represent a number of nationalities. These red units here represent British forces, and then blue units are the French Neapolitans. Dark gray, which is up here on the first sheet, represent some Greek units, and for the Santa Maura campaign. And then for the same campaign, we've got some amber forces over here, which represent the French allied Albanians. There are also some Calabrian forces here, and then for Capri, there are some Corsican Rangers over here on this side. There are also some larger event markers here that represent a second level of event that can happen on the event clock, and we'll talk about those momentarily. Lastly, there are a handful of tracking markers to keep track of victory points and momentum, fortress levels, and other game functions. Each of the 2 games comes with 2 player aids. There is an event clock for each game, and then there is a combat table for each game. They are on alternate sides of these thick cardboard markers. So Capri on one side and then Santa Maura on the other. This is the same mechanic used in Bonaparte's Eastern Empire in Maida 1806 for the event clock and the first 2 games in the series. And let's just explore how it works. So the game starts with a marker that's going to go here on the 1-die marker, and then each turn starts with a roll for an event. So if we roll a 5, we would execute this event and then play the turn. However, most of the events here are one-time events. So if you once you roll the first 5, you then look for the counter with the 5 on it, and you're going to pop that out and replace the event here for the 5 with the new marker that's on a 5. So some events will ask you to add a die. So if you're rolling 1 die, from that point on in the game, you're going to roll 2 dice. And that means now you're driving further down into the event clock, picking up the second row of events. And then as the game progresses, you eventually get up to 3 dice, and things that trigger the end game state can happen. Now, this is a very clever way, again, to spawn variety in every playthrough and at the same time trigger events in a logical fashion. As with the event clock, there are 2 combat tables in the game, one for each of the 2 campaigns. The combat tables are also clever. The number across the top represents the combat value of a force in battle, which represents the strength points times a modifier depending upon the type of unit. You then cross-reference that number with the nationality, and you get a number at the top and then some factors for damage. So say, for example, if we were attacking as the British with 17 combat factors, we would come down here, and British commander leading the forces, it would go here, and then you would use this mini table to generate your results. If the French had 27 attacking forces, we would come here, cross-reference the French, and this would be the results that they need. Now, at the number at the top here, you need to roll this top number or greater to do any damage at all, and then you do strength point damage based on the various 5s or 6 in your resultant dice rolls. So, for example, a combat of 6 would represent, a dice roll of 6 would represent 3 hits if you're the British attacking with 17 combat factors. Now, keep in mind that it's here and it's in these places that commanders can be burning up glory to change your own dice rolls for themselves and also to influence the dice rolls for their enemies. So again, it's this clever system that brings into play leader effectiveness, unit strength, and unit quality. We've got 6 dice in the game, used for movement and action success as well as combat, and there are also some wooden pawns that can be used to facilitate combat and momentum tracking. Let's take a look at our maps. Going with the reduced scope and scale of each of these campaigns, we've got a double-sided thick 12-inch by 16.5-inch board that has the Capri map on one side, and then the Santa Maura map is on the other side. Now, if we look here at the Capri map, we can see the victory and glory point tracker around the edge of the board, with the island in the middle, all done in the game's periodic art style. And looking at areas specifically, we can see the numbers in each area, which represent the number of dice you throw to take an action there. So for example, if you want to move from this base with the number 2 on it, you have to roll 2 dice to see if you're successful. And to succeed, you need a single 5 or 6 on either die. And if you get one, everything in that space can move. And if you fail, then you have a choice to wait to see whether you want to expend leader glory to try to re-roll. And this is the same limits of glory mechanic used in the other games, and it's a unique way to create a lot of uncertainty and movement. Now we can also see the built-up areas here on the island with their victory point totals for each area. Victory in Capri is somewhat nuanced. The French win if they control both Capri town and Anna Capri at the end of a turn, and the British win if they destroy 10 French gunboats. Now, if neither side has reached its victory condition before the event that triggers the British surrender, which happens late in the game on that event clock, then the player with the most victory points wins, and there's some other tiebreakers that come into play if needed. If we look at the Santa Maura map, we can see a similar art style and area setup. In this campaign, however, there are no victory point values for built-up areas. As a sole determinant of victory is right here, whoever controls the Santa Maura fortress. That was the images, those are some of the images I showed at the very beginning of the video, with the remains of that fortress. As such, the track here around the outside is solely used for tracking leader glory points. And there you have a quick look at Volume 3 and the Limits of Glory system, Santa Maura and Capri. With their smaller maps and the quicker playing time and the smaller force pools, this 2-in-1 package I think looks to be a great way to dig into the Limits of Glory system to see if it might be something you'd enjoy. It's great to see these games coming out from Square Games, and thanks so much for watching.